Lots of people don't believe, those with invisible disabilities, that they actually have them. Did you know that 80% of disabilities are invisible? If you knew, well done, good on ya. If not, this is one of the things this week, Invisible Disability Awareness Week, wants to tell you, wants to make you know. So what are invisible disabilities? Well, invisible disabilities are actually a huge range of conditions. These can range from neurodivergence to chronic illnesses, chronic health conditions, but also include things like chronic pain, chronic fatigue syndrome, and everything else that you can't perceive by simply looking at a person. But that is happening inside of them and therefore isn't clearly obvious, like for instance, a wheelchair user. You can see the wheelchair, you understand they have some kind of mobility impairment. Invisible disabilities cause additional challenges for many people. One of these challenges that we constantly hear in research, and if you talk to the disability community, is that you have to make people believe you. Lots of people don't believe, those with invisible disabilities, that they actually have them. Kelly, for instance, a person you're going to hear about more in a little while, she had people tell her that she doesn't have autism, even though she has diagnoses from experts on pieces of paper telling her she is autistic. But then she had colleagues telling her, nope, you're not autistic. You're just struggling with social stuff a bit. There are people who have chronic pain and people don't believe them. They think they're just trying to get attention, trying to get out of work, trying to get out of going to a wedding that they don't want to go to. It's seen as an excuse. Because another challenge with some invisible disabilities is that they're also fluctuating. So people might be doing really well one day and the next day might not have the energy to get out of bed. So people don't understand it. They're like, well, yesterday you were all fine, so why are you not at work or not coming out with us today? And then the next day, again, they might be okay. Some people, for instance, I had one in my interviews in one of my studies where she said that she spends the entire week just about managing her energy levels and then needs the entire weekend more or less sleeping nonstop to recuperate. So her way of making sure she has a job, she's employed, earns a living, is by basically spending her free time sleeping. So she doesn't go out with friends. She doesn't have any hobbies or does anything else, doesn't have a favorite TV show, because when she's not working, she's sleeping, trying to recover her body well enough so that it can go on the next week. The other challenge with invisible disabilities is the question, when, how, and to whom do I disclose? By disclosing, we refer to the act of telling someone that you have a disability, to announce it to someone, an individual or group. If you have a visible disability, let's say you're paraplegic and you're a wheelchair user, once people see you, they know you're disabled. You don't have to tell them. And that comes with its own challenges. However, if you have an invisible disability, in order for people to know, you have to tell them. And you have to tell them again and again and again. And why that is such a tricky decision is because you never know how they're going to respond. You never know how much discrimination, prejudice, and stigma are you going to face. Are you going to talk to someone who believes that autism isn't a thing? Someone who believes that chronic pain isn't actually something there, just people who just have a bit of a headache and not a real migraine. There are lots out there who believe such things. And you don't know when you're going into this conversation who you're going to address. Moreover, you might have to disclose an invisible disability in a context where you don't want to. This might be at a theater, in a restaurant, in a shopping center, where it's frankly a stranger and why should they know? But you have to let them know because it might impact the way you behave at security at an airport. You might be slower and people might be thinking, ooh, they're doing something dodgy. They might be dangerous. So you constantly have to decide, when do I say it? Sometimes you're forced to disclose, even though you don't want to. And often the disclosure doesn't end with someone saying, I have an invisible disability. People want to know what? And then they start asking questions. And some of these questions are extremely intrusive. If they don't face doubt or prejudice, people might face intrusive questions. As a consequence, lots of people with invisible disabilities keep them hidden. That's why originally we talked much more about hidden disabilities, because people are actively hiding. And they're hiding them due to internalized ableism, but also due to all the negative consequences that they have experienced in the past. So if they have lost a job or have been not promoted or had people not talk to them again after spin class, because they disclosed their disability, they're of course less likely to do it again. Would you? Would you tell people something about you if every time you do, or let's say 80% of the time you do, you get a negative response? No, you wouldn't. And that's a challenge with invisible disabilities. And because I saw this come through over and over again in one of my research projects that I did during the COVID-19 pandemic, my collaborator, Professor Juana Bronzai at Ivy Business School in Canada, and I were thinking about how can we get this across to people. We decided no one really in the public is going to read our research paper, so we have to do it in a different way. We decided on a documentary. It's just a talking head documentary that was completely bootstrapped, so basically with no budget, that we put together in 2022 here in the UK. Quite poignantly and fully on purpose, we called this documentary Invisible for two reasons. First, all the 6 protagonists have an invisible disability. And second, because disability is so hidden in society. For so many people, disability is invisible. And not just because people who are an invisible disability don't disclose their disability, but also because so many still live in segregated lives, worlds, or are not where non-disabled people hang out due to inaccess and exclusionary practices. What was really fascinating for me when we filmed Invisible is, of course, the fact that I'm blind, but I was the co-director for this documentary. One wasn't here, we were still in parts of COVID and she was over in Canada. So I asked Ray to be an American filmmaker that I know to help me be my co-director. And then we had Alex, a Polish cinematographer who helped with the filming, the cameras, and then we had my support worker at the time, Emilio, also helping with setting stuff up and so forth. We filmed at a couple of people's houses, a bit on my campus and at a community center as well. We let our participants, our protagonists, decide where they want to be filmed because we wanted them to feel as comfortable as possible. Most of them had never been in front of a camera or only a couple of times for smaller things. It was interesting to do because, as I said, I couldn't see what was filmed. I could only describe what I would want it to look like based on a lot of my visual memory and the bit of residual vision that I have. So with the bit of residual vision that I have, I still build pictures in my mind about what the world looks like. It's probably pretty much off from what it really looks like, but that's how my brain works. It still tries to see. And we'll always do that until the moment comes that there's nothing more coming in. So I was describing, this is what I wanted to feel like visually and so forth. I still think very visually, even though I'm blind. We did that. I also supported the editing process. How did I do that? Well, because most of it is talking head, I said which of the things the different protagonists had said I wanted in there, and then Wade did the editing. He made sure that the editing looks nice, people don't have their mouth open in a weird position or their eyes closed when things ended. I couldn't do that. I still can't do that. I can't see it. However, I could say, I want this and then this person to talk. I want it like this. If you watch the documentary, and I'm putting it in here, but also link it below, you'll also hear my voice, because I also do the audio description, because that's the other thing. We really wanted to make sure Invisible was as accessible as possible. I'm not claiming that it was fully accessible. We just tried to do the best we can with the almost non-existing budget that we had. So it's completely subtitled and it's audio described. So if there's just writing on the screen, you hear me reading it out loud. I also describe what the different people look like. That's not in the short documentary, that's in the full interviews with each person. You hear me describing what people look like as well, based on descriptions that I got. So I'm just describing based on a description I heard earlier in the same year. So that was an interesting experience as well. So I hope the descriptions are actually correct, because again, I go by hearsay, quite literally. Yeah, and then we showed Invisible to an audience that has lived on YouTube now for almost 2 years. And it is in the process of being licensed by a large academic publishing house to become teaching materials for diversity, disability studies classes, and so forth. I would really recommend checking it out. And also to check out the long interviews with the different protagonists, because again, it gives you a deeper insight. And what all of them share and say at some point in the documentary, in different ways, in their own words, but it always boils down to, if they would have been able to see someone like them or hear about someone like them when they were younger, it would have made a huge difference to their life. Jess, for instance, puts it as, she would have seen that happiness is possible. And again, isn't that something for all of us? But because invisible disability is invisible, it's highly stigmatized, it stays more invisible. So it's even harder for those who have these conditions to find others who they can aspire to and see that they live a life they want to and that they find fulfilling, whatever that fulfillment means to them. I hope you took away from today that there might be more visibly disabled people around you than you're aware. You probably have colleagues, neighbors, acquaintances, maybe even friends who have an invisible disability that you're not aware of. Always remember, 15%, and sometimes even up to 20% of the population are disabled. So that's roughly every 5th to 6th person anywhere. So just think it through, how many disabled people you would have to know. You know, even if we consider that the prevalence of disability increases with age. So thanks again for watching. I hope you learned something new. Please do check out Invisible or the Invisible interviews. And I will see you again next week. Hit like, subscribe, do all of that. And also, if you want to, check out my Instagram or my X or follow me on LinkedIn. Thank you.